today I want to talk about a spiritual principle in leadership that is something that is, I believe, is really important, and I think will help us all if we know how to relate to it and understand it. And I want to read a couple of scriptures to kind of get us going here. And I want to start in 1 Samuel chapter 15, and I want to read from verse 20. And in 1 Samuel 15 and verse 20, it says, "And Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the plunder, the sheep and the oxen, and the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." Now this is Saul talking to Samuel, and Samuel, remember, is the prophet, right? Saul is the king, and so this was Saul talking to Samuel. Now Samuel responds, and he says this, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? And to heed," and he said this, "and behold, to obey is better than sacrifice." And that's a phrase I want to emphasize as we talk about this for a few minutes. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. Verse 23, "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king." So one of the things that I want to just share today in the light of this is Saul was getting ready to face, before this passage began, earlier in this chapter, he's getting ready to face the Amalekites and go in and of course do battle. And before he went in, Samuel had given him instructions, and Samuel told Saul, he said, "Now, once you have defeated the Amalekites," he said, "I want you to destroy everything." This is what he told him, destroy everything. And he said, "And then when I get back," Samuel said to Saul, "when I come back, then I will offer sacrifices to the Lord," basically for the victory that happened. I'll do that. We'll honor the Lord in doing that. And so that was the instruction that Samuel had given to Saul. And what we see happen was Saul went in and he had a great victory over the Amalekites, but Samuel was a little delayed in getting there. He took a couple extra days before he got there, and what Saul thought, when he was going to arrive. So Saul did a couple of things. The first thing he did was he did not destroy what Samuel told him to destroy. He kept some of the stuff, in the way he explained it, he kept it in order to sacrifice it. That was really what he was saying there. And then because Samuel was delayed in coming to him, Saul went ahead and took the prophet role on himself, even though he was the king, and he offered the sacrifices for himself. In other words, he did it because Samuel was late in arriving. And so when Samuel got there, what he said is really profound. And it applies to us today in all levels of leadership. It applies to me directly in my responsibility as CEO and my responsibility to Big Andrew and Miss Jamie and to all of you. And it applies to you in your responsibility in your upline and your downline. And it's this, and here's what he said. And so Samuel said, after Saul said, "But the people took of the plunder." In other words, Saul didn't take the responsibility for taking the sheep and the things that that Samuel had told Saul to destroy, Saul didn't take responsibility. He blamed it on the people. That'd be like you doing something and I blamed it on all of you when really I'm the one responsible. You understand? And so that's what he did. He basically blamed it on the people when it was really Saul that was the one responsible for doing the wrong thing. And he shouldn't have done it. So here's how Samuel explained it back to him, or said it to him. And he said in verse 22, "Has the Lord his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord?" And then this statement I want to center in on for this part today. He said, "Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." And so people will hear that and they go, well, Billy, what does that mean? Well, what he said is that it's better to obey. I'll give you an example. If I came in here today, so we have a trash can. I see a couple of trash cans on the walls. And let's say we were having a party in here. And let's just say that stuff was on top of the tables. You know, I'm sure there's stuff on the floor, but let's just say stuff on the top of the tables. And so I said, let's, we've had a party, we kind of messed the place up. Let's clean off the top of the tables here and just take that and take it over and put it in the trash can. Let's just do that, to help the facilities team, and let's just, do our part. And we all decided, or you all decided, because I'm up here, you all decided that instead of cleaning off the top of the tables, you're going to go get a couple of vacuum cleaners and you're going to vacuum. So when I come back in here, the floors are really vacuumed well, but the top of the tables are still covered with all the stuff that we really needed to clean and move. And if I were to ask someone, well, what happened? I thought we were going to clean off the top of the tables. And somebody said, well, didn't you see how hard we worked? It took us 2 hours to vacuum this floor. Now let's just pretend the floor really didn't need to be vacuumed. But even if it did, what happened is you substituted what was directed for some other service that you call sacrifice, because it was harder to vacuum than it was to clean the floors. In leadership, this happens, and in organizations, this happens a lot. What happens is instead of doing what was directed, we substitute some other activity and call it sacrifice, and we end up substituting it for real obedience, or following the direction that was given. And the minute we do that, and people say, well, what's wrong with sacrifice? I always remember this about sacrifice. Sacrifice always has an element of self-will in it. I didn't say you had the wrong motive. I didn't even say you had the wrong heart. It's just that when you sacrifice, you choose what you're going to do as opposed to what was actually directed. And so a lot of times when it's in leadership, what I find, and this is a hard message or a hard thing to say in an environment like this, but I want to do it anyway because, and I want to take the time. I read a quote the other day. Supposedly, I think I saw it on Facebook, that Nick Saban supposedly said, he said, it's if you want to be a real leader, not everybody's going to like you. And then he said, and if you want everybody to like you, don't get into leadership, go sell ice cream. That's a pretty weak laugh for all of you. So when I'm sharing this with you, I've seen this happen a lot in the church world out there. I've seen it happen in the business and corporate world as well, where people we call it the law of substitution. That you end up substituting something of effort and energy that looks legitimate, but it's not a true reflection of what was directed. In the military, if you do that in a real zone, it would be disastrous. If you assumed that the colonel is telling you the enemy is right there on the top because he's in a position to see it. But you say, I really think they're over there, and you go around and your whole platoon gets killed. Well, that's definitely a sacrifice. But if you would have obeyed what the colonel said, nobody might have got killed. You substituted, even though it was noble, what you attempted to do. And so one of the reasons that I say that is some people live in this world. They live in a world of substitution. They live in a world, instead of directing and following what God told them or the person that they're under has directed for them to do, they end up carrying out what we call the law of substitution. And in doing so, what happens if that happens across the ministry, then we're not really reflecting what Big Andrew wants us to do. We end up interpreting what we think he's telling us to do instead of reflecting. And so that law of representation, which goes with the law of substitution, is I want to reflect what someone has directed, not interpret what somebody has directed. And so all of us that have been in leadership, and you're all here, you're in leadership or you wouldn't be in this meeting, it's very easy to interpret what was directed and call it sacrifice. But what we really want to do as leaders is reflect what was directed and term it obedience. In other words, we want to do. There's times with Big Andrew and I when I do not necessarily always agree with what he sees or how he sees it, but it's not my job to change his mind. It's not my job to convince him of what I'm thinking. It's my job to reflect what he directs. And the minute that I don't reflect as CEO what he has told us to do or told me to do, the minute I don't reflect it and I put my own interpretation into it, then what happens is there's an element that I have of my own self-will that is put in there. And I'm not saying all of us are perfect on doing this. I'm not saying that we all do it right. I'm not saying I do it right all the time. What I'm saying is that we have to work continually on the law of representation so that we do not function in what I call the law of substitution. We're not substituting what has been directed for something we feel. Now, let me be candid about this for a minute. There are things that if you receive a direction, you may see something clearer than the person providing the direction. That may actually happen. That may be true. But you have to give God a chance to work with the leader, whoever you're operating under that's providing direction. You have to pray for them and give the Lord, not manipulate them, right? But pray for them for God to show them whatever it is. But my job is not to convince them. My job is not to try to change their mind. My job is to reflect what they want. Now, you can give warning signs and share that, but you still have to go do what has been directed.